Good evening. Thank you everybody for joining us for the third presentation in our Celebrating 50 Years of Excellence, UW-SP's College of Natural Resources Spring Seminar Series. This is, first, before we get started, I would like to thank all the people who have helped make this seminar series possible. First of all, I would like to thank Stacy Allen Bonnick, who's here today. She's with the College of Natural Resources, and she has helped tremendously in organizing this seminar series and has helped with identifying and contacting speakers for us. And I would also like to thank all the CNR faculty, discipline, and department coordinators. Each one of these folks has worked with the folks within their discipline to help identify some speakers and reach out to alumni so that we could have a really nice seminar series here today. So I'd like to thank all of those individuals for helping out with the planning of this seminar series. Whenever we have a public presentation, including one that is virtual, we like to take a moment to recognize the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point occupies lands of the Ho-Chunk and Menominee people. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral Ho-Chunk and Menominee land and the sacred land of all Indigenous peoples. And so this is the third seminar in our seminar series. We have 4 more yet to go. We have 3 more that are on Thursdays at 5 o'clock. And then we have the final one will be on a Friday at April 9th at 5 o'clock. So our website has more information. You can find information at www.uwsp.edu/WCW for more information about our speakers. And just a reminder that during this talk, you are if you want to ask any questions or of the speaker, or if you have any concerns, use the chat box to enter your questions or comments at any time, and we'll answer questions at the end. And now I'm going to ask Scott Hingstrom to talk about the Natural Resources College. Excuse me, the 50th anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's my pleasure to speak here today. I'm Scott Hingstrom, Extension Wildlife Specialist and Director of the Wisconsin Center for Wildlife. I'm welcoming you all to this College of Natural Resources Spring Seminar Series, and it really is a celebration of this 50th anniversary of the College of Natural Resources here at UW-Stevens Point. We all know that the College of Natural Resources here is the largest and the best institute of its kind in the world. And I have to harken back to one of our former wildlife professors, Neil Payne. He's writing a book currently that traces the generation of the field of wildlife, or the wildlife profession, and he traces it right back to Wisconsin. And many of you know about Aldo Leopold, who started it all in 1934 at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Leopold's book, Sand County Almanac, it's known worldwide. But in 1937, Charles Watson taught the first conservation class here at UW-Stevens Point. In 1946, Fred Schmeekley, which many of you recognize that name from the Schmeekley Reserve, he was the first professor of a one-person department of conservation education here at Stevens Point, which eventually became a Department of Natural Resources in 1968, and ultimately the College of Natural Resources in 1971, when Daniel O. Traynor was hired to be the first dean of our college. So here we are, 50 years later, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the College of Natural Resources here at UW-Stevens Point. We have an outstanding slate of presenters that are coming to us from all disciplines of the College of Natural Resources and from all of our decades that we've been here. And I certainly do hope that you enjoy them. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Anna Haynes with College of Natural Resources to introduce our today's speaker.
All right, thank you, Scott. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Haynes, and I teach natural resource planning at the College of Natural Resources. I've been here since the year 2000, and one of my first duties of service was to redo the curriculum for the planning program. And so I did that dutifully. And then one of my first students was Carrie, who is our speaker here. She graduated in 2002 in December, and she worked for me on a couple of projects. I really like to hire students to work with me on any number of projects. So she was one of two that worked with me. So Carrie worked for me on one project. It was with the Bad River Band of Lake Chippewa, Lake Superior, Chippewa. And we worked on their integrated resource management plan. We were interviewing all sorts of people up in that Lake Superior area about how they created that plan. It was quite an interesting interviews and process that we were learning about. The other project was creating a landowner publication focused on conservation easements. And the impetus of the project came from CNR's first dean and the building's namesake, so Dan Trainer, and his friend, George Rogers, who was a newspaperman and conservationist. So those two guys had created this group, an environmental group called the Plover River Alliance. And the purpose was to conserve land within the watershed of the Plover River. So they had called me and asked me if I would help them create this publication. Fortunately, Carrie was working with me and I delegated it to her. So I will then move on here and say that Carrie was great to work with. I really enjoyed working with her, and I've watched her career over the course of the past almost 20 years, which is hard to believe. And so I will turn it now over to Carrie. She's going to tell us about how her UWSP and CNR career kind of helped her find her passion for conserving land and for creating and implementing long-range plans and doing many other things. So Carrie, welcome to this seminar series, and I can't wait to hear about the arc of your career. So welcome.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, Scott, and Anna, for the warm welcome. And greetings to everybody who's in attendance today and to anyone who may watch this presentation at a later date. Let's see, I'm trying to get my presentation up here. Is it showing yet?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, today this presentation will focus mainly on my nonprofit land conservation experiences and opportunities. I'll focus on two land trusts that I work for professionally, Loon Echo Land Trust in Bridgeton, Maine, and Northwoods Land Trust in Eagle River, Wisconsin. And I'll also share a volunteer opportunity with the Maine chapter of the Appalachian Mountain Club. So my background is I grew up in Wausau, Wisconsin, and I got my associate's degree at UW-Marathon County. And at UW-MC, I took an environmental ethics course that really opened up my eyes to what's going on in the world. I had no idea, living in the city of Wausau and not spending much time outside or in the environment. I didn't know things were going on like factory farming and monoculture type agriculture and large scale mining. And it just kind of shocked me. And I knew then that I wanted to dedicate my career to natural resources. So I thought about applying to schools outside of Wisconsin to kind of get out of my home state, but it just so happened that within a 30-minute drive from home is the best school of natural resources around. So in 1999, I transferred to the UW-SP and got enrolled in the CNR, the College of Natural Resources. I spent 3 years focusing on my academics there to fulfill my bachelor's degree in natural resource management with an emphasis in land use planning. While there, I worked 3 part-time jobs. As Anna said, I was a program assistant for the Center for Land Use Education based in the CNR. I also worked at the Water and Environmental Analysis Lab, where I tested groundwater and surface water, also based in the CNR. And I bartended in the evenings at the Silver Coach restaurant. So I found the land use planning department. I don't quite remember how, but it seemed to suit me really well. It focused a little bit less on like the hard science, which I'm not necessarily that good at. And it focused more on the human dimensions and human influences on the landscape and our relationship to natural resources. At that time, and I think it still is, the land use department was smaller and more intimate. So I knew all the other seniors by first name or knew them well. And Anna was about our only professor that we ever had for the focus on the land use. So we got to know her really well too. I enjoyed the semester work that we did. She exposed us to a lot of different planning concepts and local projects that we got to work on. One was the Little Wolf Park concept plan that a few other students and I developed and proposed to the village of Iola. And we presented our poster at the CNR Student Research Symposium. And I also remember a field trip we did where we went off campus and a landscape architect gave us a lecture, and I think we did some tours about conservation design and cluster subdivisions. And I remember each of us had to have our piece of paper in front of us and design our own cluster conservation subdivision using M&Ms as the homes. So that was a lot of fun. We also did urban infill scenarios for vacant buildings in the business district of Stevens Point. So we're looking at like the smaller grocery store buildings that became vacant when large big box stores were starting to come about and build on the outskirts of town. And it was our job to kind of come up with ideas of how we could help improve the areas that were vacant. So when I began working for Professor Haynes as the program assistant at the Center for Land Use Education, like she said, one of the projects I worked on was researching and writing and designing a river owner's handbook and a conservation easement little handbook that describes conservation methods available to residents in the Plover River watershed to assist the Plover River Alliance with outreach to area landowners. I didn't know it at the time, but this would really be the basis for my career. And I'd use conservation easements as a primary tool many times for the work that I did. So CLUE really exposed me to how longer term planning efforts and studies applied to the real world. So another favorite experience at the CNR was going to Tree Haven in 2001 for 6 weeks of immersed study, where we got exposure to all the other natural resource disciplines. And some of my favorite memories there were electroshocking the fish, which shown in the pictures here. These are the only pictures I could find in my files. We were marking boundaries of forested 40s with toilet paper, which was a lot of fun because it does break down pretty easily with the rain. We identified hundreds of plants and trees, and the students had a competition to see who could have the highest tick count every day. And I just like being in northern Wisconsin. It was a different environment from what I was used to. And now the Tree Haven Tomahawk facility is close to where I live in northern Wisconsin today. So senior internship opportunities are also really important for getting graduates ready for a career. And I was fortunate to have a really awesome internship. In 2002, I was a U.S. Environmental Protection Agency intern. It was a paid position funded by the EPA and in partnership with Northern Arizona University's Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. It offered hands-on experience in tribal offices across the country, and only about a dozen students were selected each year. And they could be Native or non-Native students to assist tribes with their environmental programs. Our orientation was in Washington, D.C. at the EPA headquarters, and where we got to speak in depth with some of the tribal program officers, tour a lot of their buildings, and we even got treated to breakfast at the White House, which was a little bizarre for 12 shy interns eating breakfast at the White House, but it was an experience. And we were there 6 months after 9/11 happened, so it was a very different, feel to the city at the time, going to a lot of these federal buildings. So we found out our placements when we were in DC, and I was selected to go work in Oregon at the Planning and GIS Department of the Umatilla Tribal Headquarters, where 3 tribes together collaborated on the regional conservation programs, and that was in Pendleton, Oregon. And there I studied the Umatilla River, how its path, its water quality, and its fisheries population changed over time due to human influences on the landscape. So that time at the Tree Haven in the streams doing studies really helped me with my field work on the Umatilla River. And the GIS mapping courses that I took as part of my major qualified me for this role, because then I spent a lot of time doing GIS work and mapping out the river change over decades of time. I also got to travel over the Northwest, which was great. And here's a picture of me at the Olympic National Park sitting in a fallen down old growth tree that's hollow in the inside. And so any students interested, this program is still going strong, and they have a good website on the Northern Arizona University's Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals if you want to check it out. So after graduation, I headed to the East Coast to explore and worked as a campground host in the White Mountain National Forest. So after a summer of doing that, I was faced with having to find a real job, and we weren't done exploring the East Coast. So looked for some work and found a part-time position at the local nonprofit land trust named Loon Echo Land Trust in Bridgeton, Maine, and I was hired as their campaign administrative assistant. It was part-time work, so I looked for additional work and got a part-time job with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service just over the border in New Hampshire, and worked as a soil conservation aide. So after a year of working part-time for both nonprofit and government agency, I was faced with the decision, do I work in nonprofit or do I work in government conservation? I chose the land trust work because it was really creative, and there were a lot of different people that I got to work with every day, and it was really flexible work and hours, flexible lifestyle, and they were the first ones to be able to offer me the full-time position. So thankfully they did that, and I advanced there. And for those who aren't familiar with what a land trust is, land trust or a conservancy is a nonprofit organization that works with willing landowners and partners to conserve land and natural resources in perpetuity. So the land trust movement began in 1891 in Massachusetts with the formation of the Trustees of Reservations. They were formed and spearheaded by landscape architect Charles Eliot, but there was an act of the Massachusetts state legislature that formed the group, and they were a charitable corporation governed by voluntary trustees, and they're still around today. In this book here, I show Conservancy, the Land Trust Movement in America by Richard Brewer. I read it early in my career, and it really explains the evolution of the smaller land trust. After big groups were formed, like Sierra Club came a year later after the trustees in 1892. Then other big groups like the Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, Trust for Public Land, just many others came in the mid 20th century. And it was really when the Nature Conservancy decided to change their mission to be global in nature, where everyday landowner no longer could really get services to conserve their land after the Nature Conservancy grew in such size. So the small land trust, local land trust movement was born. And over the past 40 to 50 years, the movement has really grown, and now we're a very strong force where together nationwide, we do more conservation work annually than, say, government can. And today there's nearly 1,400 land trusts in the US and a little less than 50 in Wisconsin. I'll just talk a little bit more with this slide about what land trusts do and how they are governed. So land trusts start with articles of incorporation that set the purpose for the organization. Most become 501c3 nonprofit corporations that are tax exempt and are formed for charitable, scientific, and educational purposes. So they register with the IRS and their state to become a nonprofit. And once they're granted that status, they're governed by a volunteer board of directors. And most land trusts start out as small, volunteer-driven organizations, and then they start to hire their first staff. And from there, the professional staff grows. They have bylaws that set the organization's internal rules, like how to keep meeting minutes, hold elections, and report their finances to members at their annual meetings. They have to file annual reports with their state and federal tax returns, the 990, to explain to the government how their nonprofit has raised funds for management, fundraising, and programming. The tools that land trusts use are conservation easements, land purchases, land donations, and sometimes bequests of property. Conservation easements are permanent legal land protection agreements that where landowners voluntarily place restrictions on the use of their property in order to protect the land's natural features. The easement is tied to the deed and it transfers to future owners once it's in place and typically stays in private ownership. Each easement is tailored to each property to protect its features, like if it has lakes or rivers, wetlands, forests, trails, or farmland. And easements are really flexible when they're being formed. They can really be tailored, but once they're signed, they're not flexible. It's a big deal to amend an easement. Easements can be amended. The legal document basically can be changed if the conservation is enhanced, if things are added to further protect land or new lands are added on to a property, or they can be amended to change and improve language that helps the enforceability of the restrictions in place. Every conservation easement is monitored annually and by the land trust, and they file reports internally, and we save our reports and then share them with the landowners. Conservation easements have a generous federal income tax benefit, so that's advantageous to landowners, especially those that have a decent income, because then they can deduct the gift of the conservation easement value. Land trusts can purchase properties as long as the purchase price or value of the property isn't inflated. So appraisals are really common practice to get before negotiating a contract for a purchase of a property. And many of the examples I'll share with you about my work were purchases of properties. You can get lands donated as well, which is wonderful if families or corporations can donate land outright, and then the land trust takes on ownership and management. Sometimes you can get bequests of conservation property where people leave land in their will. Conservation easements can also be left through wills, but it's quite complex and it's not common. And sometimes people just leave their property, like their home or their lot or their estate, to the land trust, and it can be for resale purposes where you sell it and those monies then go to protect conservation land elsewhere. Land trusts are funded in a variety of ways. For like our operating budget to pay for staff and office and programming generally comes from just general donations from the public. Some are in the forms of annual memberships. Others are just year-end gifts. Land trusts can have small or large events to get event income. Sometimes grants from private foundations and family foundations will give money for operations. And people can give gifts of stock or IRA distributions. For land purchases, a lot of times you go for the big grants, state grants like Wisconsin Knowles Nelson Stewardship Fund is a big grant for land protection, and the DNR Lake Protection Grants and other DNR grant programs as well. Sometimes you can get federal grants like the North American Wetland Conservation Act funds, but the property has to be pretty significant in conservation value to qualify for federal grants. You can also do capital campaigns where you appeal to hundreds of donors to add up to a sizable amount to purchase the land. Land stewardship, taking care of each property, that's the big responsibility of the land trust, to make sure that you have enough resources to forever monitor and defend conservation easements that you have, as well as maintain your own properties. And ideally, each conservation property that comes to a land trust might come with a little bit of cash, which is called a stewardship endowment. And a lot of land trusts then pool all their endowments. So if you have 100 projects, you're pooling your money and your endowment grows, hopefully into the millions. And those are invested, and according to the board policy, you can get investment income that will go to support then your management of your lands every year. Also, if land trusts are into managing for timber or have a farmland focus, that income from those sales can also support management, ongoing management. So my land trust career, like I said, started in Maine. For 12 years, I was with Luneco Land Trust, and I held 3 staff positions that are most common to smaller and medium-sized land trusts. I started out in 2004 to assist the land trust with their big capital campaign to purchase and protect a big chunk of Pleasant Mountain, shown here, which was the largest mountain in the county, which kind of extended westward from Portland, Maine. So it was a $1.5 million project to buy 1,200 acres. I also ran the membership program and maintained the database, website, newsletter, those types of things. A year later, when I was brought on to be full-time, I started doing the land stewardship role in addition to what I just described. So I did a lot of trail planning and working with the Appalachian Mountain Club with their trail crews to get major trail improvement projects done, like shown here. The mountain had trails, but they weren't developed right. They just went straight up the mountain, were getting heavily eroded. And so we put in switchbacks, we put in, all these rock stairways and a lot of water bars to shed the water off the trails, and installed a lot of trail signs as well. So once the director resigned, I had the opportunity, and my board saw potential in me, and they offered me the interim executive director position to kind of test me out to see what I could do. And that was in 2007 and 2008. I was in my mid-20s and trying to figure things out, and then the Great Recession hit. So I became a one-man shop for the land trust for about a year, trying to do it all and keep things afloat. When I was promoted to be the permanent executive director, our board and I came up with a plan, even though the recession was still in full swing, to hire up. So we hired 2 additional staff members at the time to try to get ahead in our conservation gains and do more fundraising to support our growth. So my time there really with the board was to look at really quality properties to protect and pursue. And a lot of that was through the purchase of land. So naturally, working on Pleasant Mountain through the phase 1 campaign, we looked at additional opportunities to continue to expand our conservation holdings on that mountain and launch the phase 2 campaign to protect more land. And I'll just share this video. It's the Land Trust 25th anniversary video. I have a few clips throughout the slides here, which explains this project.
Campaign to protect Pleasant Mountain was Luneco's largest undertaking. $1.5 million was more than anyone had predicted the organization would attempt to raise. But strong public support helped the project be a success, as did the
Carrie, we can't hear it.
in their youth
Sorry
got
about that.
behind
There
the
we go.
project to save that beautiful space. Fortunately, we had a second opportunity to add more acreage on the mountain in phase 2, which recently was completed with the help of 250 generous donors and a significant grant from the Land for Maine's Future.
Sorry about that. I just muted. I won't do that again. So with many big conservation properties, unexpected issues arise. So with Pleasant Mountain being the largest mountain in the region, it had infrastructure demands on it. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection wanted to build a new tower with the state of Maine to have national communications improved. And the state of Maine owned 20 acres at the top of the summit where this old Forest Service fire tower sat. And that's where all the trails converged. It's kind of the primary focal point for hikers to get to. And they wanted to build this new communications tower on the summit. They did not have good access to the summit. They didn't have a way to actually get equipment up there. So they would have had to build their tower using helicopters, and then they didn't have power to keep it going, and they would have had to build solar panels all across the top of the mountain. So logically that wasn't going to work. So they approached the land trust and asked if they could build a tower on one of our undeveloped peaks. So obviously the environmental impact would have been huge. And so we said, no, but we will work with you if you can build a tower right next to the existing US cellular tower, which had a road already to the top and power coming up one side of the mountain on one of the peaks. It was difficult for them to engineer how to build a tower in the shadow of another tower, but they were able to make it work. And so that project did not make a real negative impact on the mountain, and obviously was needed for national purposes. So I wanted to share a couple of projects here. One of our earlier bigger ones was a downtown nature park in the town of Bridgeton, where our office was located. It was like virtually outside our front door. We partnered with another nonprofit in town dedicated to protecting water resources and lake testing to buy this land, which was kind of hidden behind a river in the downtown and behind homes and the hospital area on the other side of town, just a big green space. So we raised $700,000 in partnership to buy the land, build bridges, and construct trails. It was a real community effort. Over 700 people gave to the campaign. The town of Bridgeton contributed funds as well, and local artists designed and milled the lumber to build the bridge shown here in this picture. It was really fun to construct. It was similar to like an old barn raising, but it was a bridge raising. I'll share a little bit more of the videos with you here.
Luneco and Lakes Environmental Association again partnered to conserve 66 acres here in the downtown, creating a unique nature park. Park offers easy access to the trails and streams and is proving to be an economic asset. This past June, Luneco donated the property to the town of Bridgeton and holds a conservation easement to forever protect the land. Luneco gains public support for conservation projects through a variety of activities. We may lead monthly hikes at our mountains or offer other opportunities at each preserve. As the seasons change, we may hike Baldpate Mountain to catch the first sunrise of spring or observe the summer solstice. Or we may work with our volunteers and trail adopters at Pleasant Mountain for a much needed day of trail work. The nice thing about our preserves is that the young and old can enjoy and appreciate our trails year round. Well, with every land protection project comes a perpetual responsibility to maintain and monitor the land. We manage our preserves to balance between public recreation, plant and animal habitat, and sustainable timber harvesting. We work very hard to provide safe trails for public use, and partner with groups like the Appalachian Mountain Club for technical support and training on projects like erosion projects and bridge projects.
So next we move forward to protect an amazing scenic hilltop called Hackers Hill. And it was privately owned for many years, and the landowner's family, with the help of a volunteer caretaker, created just this wonderful hilltop sanctuary where the public was allowed, and they maintained it themselves. It had a road to the top because there was some towers in the rear of the property. But once the landowners aged and couldn't keep up with the property, they contacted us. And they knew it would put us in a position to act fast because this has been on our radar for 25 years. So we got an agreement right away to buy the 27-acre hilltop for $700,000. A state grant offered half, and we campaigned for most of the rest, and the town of Casco contributed $50,000 as well.
From the very beginning of Loon Echo's existence, Hackers Hill was on the radar screen. This mountain, or this hilltop, is beloved by many people, not just in Casco, but all over the region. They come here because of the incredible views of the White Mountains and Spago Lake. They come here to have weddings and funeral services and just to enjoy this place for reading and just being quiet.
So when you have a really accessible location like Hackers Hill that the people in the community and region already use, it's a really great spot to create public programming to raise awareness for the Land Trust mission. So we did a lot of fun programming that still exists today. We did acoustic sunset concert fundraisers, a couple every year. We did hawk watches, geology tours. We made informational displays. We had meteor shower parties, family picnic days with kite making and flying, and we had a road run to the top of the hill as a fundraiser as well. So land trusts, in order to become proactive and not reactive and seek out some of the best lands to protect, you need to come up with a plan. So it was our goal to really look closely at our region, which was 7 towns in 2 different counties, and really look at the landscape. We looked at several different models out there for conservation planning and selected the Trust for Public Lands Greenprint model. TPL is a national organization that conserves land for people, and they had this Greenprint, and they presented at an annual Land Trust conference, and we saw them and we knew that it was the model for us. So we approached them, asked their staff if they would come from Portland and help us in our region to create the Lake Region Greenprint. So I just have one more video, I believe.
Lake Region Greenprint was recently completed. It's a regional conservation planning project that sets a blueprint for conservation and recreation. The nice thing about the Greenprint is it was done in conjunction with our community and the 7 municipalities that we serve. So we share a regional set of goals and a vision for the future. Our board of directors is thinking big and setting goals for the future. One goal is to double the acres of protected land to 8,000 acres in 5 years' time. We also aim to work with each town to establish community forests and public parks for continued forest management and recreation.
So the planning process took 2 years to complete. We started with interviews of community leaders. We had a lot of town board presentations to town boards to get them interested in the project. And one of the components of the Greenprint model was to get community investment in the form of funding the project as well, helping fund it. So we sought $1 per resident in the Lake region as a contribution from the 7 towns. And they were put on as ballot initiatives. And so at each town meeting where they held elections, the ballot initiatives all passed. With TPL's support, a phone survey of 200 households was conducted, and they called and asked people what they felt about the region and what natural resources were most important to them and why. We held a lot of community discussion forums, and at the end, we had rankings of conservation importance using little keypads where the results could be seen on the screen. And after the rankings, it was decided that the top conservation priorities were protecting water resources, plant and animal habitat, and working farms and forests. So they mapped out each of the priorities. And then an overall regional conservation plan was developed with overlays. We also came up with an action plan with steps that really were being undertaken as just a part of the planning effort, but set in motion for the future as well, to work with the towns to promote recreation and use that to boost the economy through tourism, and to provide municipalities with a little assistance to help them think about conservation planning and to find methods to finance these conservation projects as well. So overall, the green print provided a balanced approach to conservation, where we weren't just speaking about conservation, but we were also speaking about appropriate locations for development and how to use conservation as a tool to boost the local economy. And we really built the relationships with the town departments and volunteer committees. Through the process, the towns invested more in projects that were coming up, and then had continued to in some of the examples that I'll show you that resulted in some awesome conservation projects. The two my most favorite conservation projects that came right away were community forest projects. And community forests are kind of a newer twist on the old town forest model, where they're different in the sense where community forests are either owned by a community organization like a land trust, or they're owned by the local government. Community input is essential to the process of creating the forest, and revenue from future timber management obviously goes to help maintain the forests, but also should go to help fund other community needs. So the Pearly Mills Community Forest here on the left was a big project. It spanned 3 of the towns. It was 1,600 acres in size. And we had to raise over $1 million to purchase the property from a local logging company. And thankfully we had one major donor who funded half of the project, which gave us confidence to advance it. After it was funded, the land trust bought the property, and then we turned it over to the town of Denmark with a conservation easement in place. And the town of Denmark owned, this is their piece here, but then they also ended up owning the town land to the north. And then we engaged the third town, Sebago, and they ended up owning their property as a little community forest down to the south, also with a conservation easement in place. After the success of the Pearly Mills Community Forest, the town of Raymond contacted us and said, we want our own community forest in Raymond. They had an active conservation committee. And so together we came up with a plan and identified a property that was owned by a regional lumber company that was of great interest, where they had wanted to protect it for some time. So the land trust, we were able to negotiate the purchase of 350 acres. We got a big state grant to cover a portion of it, and the town contributed $75,000 to that purchase. So we used the same model. The land trust bought the land. We negotiated the conservation easement terms with the town, and transferred the land to the town, and we, the land trust, monitored or maintained the conservation easement and monitored those terms. They turned it into a nice trail network that had mountain bike trails, hiking, and cross-country ski trails. So another way to build skills, whether it's leadership skills or within programming, is to volunteer for nonprofits. So I volunteered for 6 years for the Maine chapter of the Appalachian Mountain Club, and I spent 2 years as the committee chair. And AMC is a conservation, recreation, and educational organization. They have a history of managing backcountry huts in the White Mountain Wilderness, mainly in New Hampshire. But they have chapters, state chapters all across where the Appalachian Trail runs. And working with the Maine chapter was an exciting time because the big AMC decided that they wanted to buy a 70,000 acre tract in northern Maine from the Plum Creek Timber Company, which was near Mount Katahdin. So the AMC was essentially acting like a land trust and buying a big piece of property to conserve it. And at that time, this project really brought about how the downturn in the paper and pulp industry affected the fate of large timber holdings, because they ended up being turned over to kind of investment type companies that didn't have the land in mind. They didn't have the best interests of the land in mind. So once AMC got that property, they started a cool cross-country ski lodge to lodge system with a bunch of overnight cabins in place. And my time during the AMC, we also started a young members program to get people in their 20s and 30s engaged and connected. But a time came then when I wanted to put my career on the back burner and focus on my family. So I moved back to Wisconsin from Maine in 2016. And I took 1 year off of work to raise my son. And then I heard from a friend that the local Northwoods Land Trust based in Eagle River was hiring a few new staff positions to grow. The founding executive director there, who was also a CNR grad from a while ago, was retiring. So he was passing on his knowledge to the support staff before they hired his replacement. So I was hired as their development coordinator in 2018. The Northwoods Land Trust services 7 counties in the Northwoods of Wisconsin with a heavy focus on Vilas and Oneida counties. Protecting land along lakes and rivers is the primary focus because the Northwoods is water rich. So most of our conservation properties, whether it's easements or lands we own, have a shoreline component. We protect over 14,000 acres of land and 75 miles of shoreline today. One of our bigger projects was actually a land donation, the Yaqui Forest Reserve, which is located in Hazelhurst on Lake Catherine. So it's kind of an iconic spot when you're driving up into the Northwoods up Highway 51, you cross the bridge and the lake is on both sides. And so now we conserve the land and the islands that can be seen from the bridge. It's 430 acres of land with 4 miles of lakeshore on Lake Catherine. It was a $12 million donation from the Yaqui family. And that came to be the biggest land donation in the history of state land trusts. So now we own and manage the land. We have timber management plans in place and allow recreation, hiking, hunting, fishing, even trapping. So those traditional uses are important to maintain. So my role as development coordinator, and I don't really like the title, but development means donor development. So I do fundraising primarily and communications. I write our membership appeals, run our membership campaigns, our year-end giving campaigns. And so I write a lot of gift acknowledgement cards, a lot of handwritten cards, thanking donors. I also write all of our grants. We just got done writing a lake protection grant for a DNR grant program asking for help for Vilas County lakeshore protection. I also write grants to private foundations, mostly in Wisconsin, some in Illinois, that they usually fund our projects, but some also fund operational needs. I write and sometimes design, and sometimes hire out to design our publications, our annual reports, our brochures, our newsletters, and manage our website and prepare ads for local public radio and local newspapers. But our small staff of 5, we talk and we collaborate on a lot of different things. So I also get to contribute to thoughts on land protection, contribute to procedures and policies and programming, public programming, and just messaging for our audience in general. So the land conservation profession, obviously I highly recommend it for CNR students to consider. I think any CNR major could fit, especially with like in the land stewardship role. But all these professions could involve anybody with a background in natural resources. The work is very creative and flexible. Again, I kind of feel like, the sky's the limit, with what you come up with, as long as it complements your mission and you can create all the public programming and different projects that you want. You get to work with a lot of passionate volunteers, whether it's a board member or say like a trail adopter or an easement monitor. And you really get out in the community. You work with the everyday landowner, you work with town and county officials, other large nonprofits, and large corporations as well. And these charts show that most land conservation groups are small. Most have less than 10 employees and have a budget of less than $1 million. So the Land Trust Alliance is kind of our parent organization based in Washington, D.C. They offer trainings and conferences. They have an online learning center with a lot of great manuals with best practices. They run an accreditation program since 2006 that's optional, and more land trusts are signing up for accreditation. And they also have a really good job board with national opportunities with small and large conservation organizations. And here in Wisconsin, we have the Gathering Waters Alliance for Land Trusts. So they're similar to what the Land Trust Alliance does, but on a state level. Okay, well, that's all I have. And I thank everybody for your interest in land trusts and land conservation work. And after the question and answer today, you can always contact me by email. If you forget this long email, you can look up the Northwoods Land Trust website and I'll be listed there and you can send me your questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much for talking about this. So there are a couple of questions, I believe, in the chat. And for everyone that's on, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will read them off. It's probably the easiest way, correct, Jennifer?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we have one question in the chat already. This one is from Scott, and he is asking, forever is a long time. How durable do you think permanent easements will be 100 plus years into the future, considering the pendulum swings in our legal and political system?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not often talked about, within the land trust community about what forever means. We just assume that these are permanent easements. But yeah, when you think 100 years out, I think really what's making these easements permanent is obviously law, federal and state law that's maintaining the integrity of easements. Obviously, they're challenged often when new landowners come about. They don't understand all the terms of the easement sometimes and can violate those terms, and it ends up in court, which is the last case scenario that a land trust wants, but it happens. But all the case law that I know about to date has protected the integrity of the conservation easement laws, and the movement's growing. So it's a primary way to conserve land across the U.S. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. I just hope that it remains strong and that government never takes those protections away and takes the tax incentives away, which would really lessen the amount of easements every year.
Right, yeah. Well, I have a question that kind of spins off of that one, and that is about climate change. So, right, we're talking about perpetual conservation easements, and we know that there's going to be lots of climate change impacts, and then, you know, stewarding those lands. So is the land trust community or the Northwoods Land Trust right now thinking about, like, how do you contend with that kind of issue?
Mhm. Yeah, I'd say like just now it's starting to become mainstream in our education as land trusts through the Land Trust Alliance and Gathering Waters. There's been a lot of Zoom conferences and discussions about how to best plan for climate change and new programs that are coming up to help land trust plan better for that. But I remember 10 years ago, you know, groups like the Open Space Institute thinking more seriously about that and having models that already tried to predict what are the best lands that can respond to climate resiliency. So there's going to be more models that are going to come about that will help us look at the landscape at a more landscape level and not at an individual parcelized level, and look where the connectivity is. The more land you have connected, the better off you are. The more plant and animals can travel and migrate essentially over time. So connectivity is huge, but also there'll be models that look at things about slope aspect and all these other characteristics that would come into play in trying to figure out what's the best property that can help species thrive throughout climate change.
Excellent, thank you. We have a couple more questions that came in from the chat. Chris Yaqui asked, how is research on land trust land handled?
Research on land trust land. If they're saying like through an individual land trust, let's see.
Yeah, might be like referring to wildlife. I was clarifying if somebody wanted to do some wildlife research on a land trust property.
Yeah, I know just management planning is huge. So typically like management or research would be done on the lands that the land trust owns and has control over the management. But I think, you know, owning land, maybe they might only own it for say a decade so far. And so a lot of land trusts don't think about longer term studies of the property. But we've done a few with forest management where you have models set up where say half of your property is managed one way for its forest management and the other half is managed another way, maybe even just left alone. And so you can study that change over time. And you can also use that as an educational tool. We haven't done a lot of wildlife specific surveys, but we have hired ecologists. Like on Pleasant Mountain, we hired an ecologist for every 5 years to come out and study the birds and the animals and the plants and issue reports. So we're at least educated about what's out there. But I don't know of a lot of land trusts that are young, you know, 20, 30 years old that do a lot of studies, but I'm sure the older land trusts that have been around for 50 plus years have been thinking more about that.
And so Carrie, just a little bit of a follow-up on that one. You know, a landowner who has a conservation easement on their property, research would need to be in the easement language, wouldn't it? And then you'd have to get permission to get on their property.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to spell out in the easement that research is allowed, but as long as they would, agree to that. We were actually just talking about when we had a staff outing the other day up in Iron County, we were talking about an easement landowner for 50 years. He's been studying the lichens on his own property and like published scientific papers and stuff. And we're like, wow, that's so cool. You know, we wish we had more landowners that did that sort of thing. So some can take it on their own initiative. But yeah, if they're open to the land trust kind of poking around every corner of their property, then, you know, we could work with professionals to do studies on easement properties.
Interesting. Right. So thanks, Carrie. There are more questions coming in. So one is from Aaron. what are some of the important points you might use that work to convince the government or landowners or people to donate, to want to protect land or put them into easements?
Well, one is just trying to break the stereotypes about that we just want to conserve land and lock it up and never touch it. That's kind of the old way of thinking, but you still stumble across that. To kind of, our bigger messaging is to point out, obviously the impact on protecting things like water quality, direct relationship to protecting lake and other surface water quality. And obviously we know that's huge to property values and the economy, and just our identity as a water rich state. Another is just tying it into whatever economic purposes that you can tie into forest management being a big one, to explain that a lot of land trusts do manage their forests, and we're contributing to that, forest-based economy. Recreation is another big one. Out in Maine, there was like one state park in our service area, so we were the go-to for recreation. We became the people that people looked at for trail information, and we were expected to build more trails and keep doing it. So recreation and bringing people to the region is also huge. I don't know, do you have any other thoughts, Anna? Because I know you volunteer on the board of the land trust there, right, in Stevens Point?
I do. And our executive director is here.
Oh, okay, great.
I see, because maybe he can pipe up. Maybe I don't know if he's allowed to. Yeah, I think you hit a lot of the big ones. I think some of it is talking with specific landowners if they are interested, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what a conservation easement is, and so getting them to understand what it is and what it will do for them also is an important piece, other than what the land trust does as a whole.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot to touch on like reaching out to the landowner themselves. And the Northwoods Land Trust in Eagle River has done a phenomenal job with just like connecting broadly with like every landowner. They do like GIS work to identify all the property owners in an area, and then they do mailings and continue to mail those owners informational booklets, and they get a good response. I mean, people that may not know exactly what a conservation easement is, they know that we're a trusted name, so they contact us to find out more. And I'm just amazed at how many people do come forward and seek out our services.
Yeah, I think Northwoods Land Trust is one of the most successful ones in Wisconsin, is my understanding. Yeah. And Brian Pierce, I think, was the graduate from this program who was the executive director for a long time, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Brian retired 2 years ago, and yeah, he was the driving force behind the land trust.
So there's one more question in here. It sounds like there's a lot of flexibility in what one's roles look like in a land trust. Is there a place for an individual who is a fine art photographer and soil scientist within a land trust?
Well, if you you could definitely offer your skills. Like right now, I keep saying we have to, like, I don't know if this is something this person does in particular, we have to create more videos. Like, why don't we have enough videos out there? So, having the right, photography and the right videos and the content to get out there, because that's where things are. But some of us are kind of a little older school and don't always have those skills. So if you can show that you have skills in, websites, photography, obviously social media and things like that, and you also have a conservation background, well, yeah, then you qualify for some of the roles, maybe in communications, especially, and some then land stewardship as well. I have a minor in soil science. I can't say I totally used it other than understanding how to improve trails and how soil moves. But soil is definitely, part of the mix of skills that land trust might look for.
Thank you. Yeah. And Garrett, I think it depends if you're talking probably about an actual position, a paid position versus volunteering. I think land trusts are always willing to have a volunteer for stewardship and for anything else that you might want to. So there's plenty of land trusts around Wisconsin, and there is one in this area as well, the North Central Conservancy Trust.
Yeah, volunteering, exactly. Sometimes it might be hard to, get people's attention, but once they find out your skills, they'll want you involved. So that video that I showed a lot of clips from too, that was all a volunteer that did that put that together. I had to kind of create the outline and line people up, but he videotaped it all and put it all together. So that was all volunteer done. And a lot of our signature photography was also a volunteer done. That's all over the website of the Land Trust in Maine.
So Chris Yaqui, he has just a comment here. Really interesting. Thank you. I get to work with the Door County Land Trust. They have partnered with the Urban Ecology Center in Milwaukee to conduct bio blitzes on some of their properties. That sounds fun.
Yeah, a quick get everybody out and do a quick bio blitz to collect information. So that could be a good research tool idea for other land trusts. Very good.
So Jennifer, I don't know what the timing of this is, so let me turn it over to you.
Well, we're at about 5:06 right now, and it looks like there aren't any more incoming questions. So if anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to get one in, but I think we're at time. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and thanks to those of you who have stayed to ask questions. And thank you, Carrie, very much for your presentation today. This was wonderful, and we are really appreciative of you joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank
Scott,
you.
do you have any final words you wanted to say?
No, I appreciate Carrie coming and sharing your knowledge with us. It's nice to have you back here in Wisconsin, and looks like you're doing great things out there for all of us. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was a great opportunity. I appreciate it. And again, anybody email me at my carrie@northwoodslandtrust.org address, and then I'll be inspired now to come back and visit the CNR here and check out what's going out there.
Super.